He was never meant to be found alive. Not in that storm, not in that kennel, not with the water already climbing toward his mouth and the world outside pretending it had heard nothing. The white German shepherd stood in the last run at the back of Rhodes Animal Recovery Center, chest deep in brown floodwater, his soaked fur clinging to the sharp lines of his ribs, his ears pinned low beneath the thunder that rolled over southern Louisiana like a warning no one wanted to read. Rain hammered the tin roof hard enough to blur every other sound, but the dog did not bark. He had barked earlier. He had spent his strength on that, on the old instinct that said AK-9 did not surrender while there was still air in his lungs. Now he only breathed through his nose, slow and careful, lifting his muzzle each time the water rose with the push of the wind. Around his neck hung a ruined leather collar, stiff with mud, carrying a small weight pressed beneath the folded seam. Twice, he had tried to bite it loose. Twice, his teeth had slipped on the wet leather. The thing hidden inside was not food, not comfort, not anything a dog could name, but he guarded it with the stubborn obedience of a soul that remembered being trusted. Somewhere beyond the flooded aisle, a loose chain knocked against a gate. 3 taps, then silence. The dog lifted his head, his pale eyes, almost silver in the flash of lightning, fixed on the dark corridor ahead. He waited. Another gust drove rain through a broken window. The water shivered. A plastic bowl drifted past his paws and bumped softly against the bars. No footsteps came. No human voice called his name. The sign above the building still said rescue. The letters painted blue and cheerful, but inside there was only the smell of rust, bleach, wet concrete, and fear that had soaked too long into the walls. The dog lowered his muzzle again and nudged the loose chain with the side of his mouth. It struck the gate once, then again, then again. 3 small sounds in a storm too large to care. Half a mile away, Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks almost kept driving. His black pickup rolled slowly along the drowned county road, headlights cutting through sheets of rain and floating pine needles. He was 37 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet-faced, a black United States Marine with a close-cropped beard and eyes that had learned to measure danger before emotion. His uniform jacket was folded on the passenger seat, damp from hours of moving sandbags near the parish shelter. His hands were steady on the wheel, but the floodwater crawling across the road pulled at something old in him, something he kept buried under discipline and silence. Years earlier, in another state after another storm, he had watched a young Marine disappear behind a wall of rushing water during a rescue run that should have been routine. Isaiah had carried that sound ever since, not the shouting, not the sirens, but the sudden absence afterward. The place where a voice had been. Tonight, every ditch looked deeper than it was. Every current seemed to know his name. He was heading back to the Emergency Operations Center when the radio crackled and died, leaving only static and rain. Then he heard it. Not loud, not even clear. A thin metallic tapping from somewhere beyond the tree line to his right. Isaiah eased off the gas. The truck rolled another 10 feet before stopping beside a leaning mailbox half swallowed by water. He sat still, listening. The rain hit the roof in hard silver bursts. A transformer hummed far off in the dark. He told himself it was debris. A loose gate. A branch. Something harmless. Then it came again. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. Isaiah turned his head toward the abandoned gravel drive nearly hidden between flooded cattails. His headlights caught the edge of a sign swinging in the wind. Rhodes Animal Recovery Center. Closed for evacuation, according to the county list. Cleared, according to the report he had seen that afternoon. Empty, according to everyone who had signed off and moved on. But the tapping came again, weaker this time, and Isaiah's jaw tightened. He put the truck in park, pulled on his rain jacket, grabbed the flashlight and pry bar from behind the seat, and stepped into water that swallowed his boots up to the ankles. The cold hit fast. Louisiana floodwater was not clean river water. It carried mud, gasoline, leaves, old trash, and the heavy smell of things pushed out of hiding. Isaiah moved down the drive with the careful patience of a man who knew panic wasted breath. Lightning opened the sky for half a second, revealing the low kennel building at the end of the lot, its gutters hanging loose, its side door banging softly against its frame. The tapping stopped. Isaiah froze. "Hello." His voice carried poorly through the storm. No answer. He reached the door and pushed it open with his shoulder. The smell met him first, thick and sour beneath the bleach, the kind of smell no rescue center should ever have. His flashlight beam slid over empty runs, overturned bowls, torn blankets, clipped chains dangling from hooks. Too many signs of leaving in a hurry. Too many signs of something left behind. Water covered the floor, black and trembling, reflecting broken pieces of ceiling light. Isaiah moved deeper. Anybody in here? A shape shifted at the far end. Not large at first, just white against the dark. Then lightning flashed again through the broken window, and he saw him. A white K9 German Shepherd locked in the last kennel, standing in water nearly to his throat, one paw lifted against the gate, eyes fixed on Isaiah with a focus so human it made the Marine stop breathing for one beat. On the gate, written in black marker on a strip of duct tape, were 3 words, "Do not release." Isaiah stared at the words, then at the dog. The shepherd did not bark. He only nudged the chain once more. Tap, tap, tap. Isaiah stepped forward, water pushing against his shins now. "Easy, boy," he said, low and steady, the way Marines speak when fear is present but not in command. The dog's ears twitched at the tone. Not trust. Not yet. Something older than trust. Recognition, maybe, of a voice that did not come to take, did not come to punish, did not come to leave. Isaiah lifted the pry bar and set the flashlight between his teeth, aiming its trembling beam at the rusted latch. Behind the kennel, the roof groaned under the weight of rainwater collecting in a sagging seam. The dog watched him. Isaiah saw the collar then, tight and dark against the white fur, saw the raw line. Beneath it, saw how the animal kept his head angled as if protecting something hidden there. A slow anger moved through him, quiet and controlled. He had seen many kinds of neglect in disaster zones. Hunger, panic, people making bad choices in bad hours. This felt different. This felt arranged. The water rose another inch, touching the bottom of the shepherd's jaw. Isaiah planted his boots, wrapped both hands around the pry bar, and leaned into the lock. Metal screamed. The dog flinched but did not move away. "I'm not leaving you here," Isaiah whispered. Outside, thunder cracked over the building, and inside, in the last flooded run of a place that had called itself mercy, the white K9 closed his teeth around the hidden collar seam one final time, as if making sure the secret would survive long enough for the right man to find it. The rain had not eased, but the water inside the kennel had stopped rising, leaving a shallow pool that reflected broken pieces of light from the overhead fixtures. Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks set the pry bar aside and knelt, careful not to disturb the precarious footing beneath his boots. Atlas remained still, chest pressed against the metal grate, muscles taut with every heartbeat. The dog lifted his head slightly, amber eyes glinting through wet strands of fur, and let out a soft, steady whine that carried more warning than fear. Isaiah reached for the ruined leather collar, sliding his fingers under the water to gently lift the small weight hidden beneath the mud-stained folds. Atlas watched intently, ears twitching with every motion, as if measuring the intention behind each gesture. Beyond the kennel, the wind rattled the structure and rain ran in thin rivulets through cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of rusted metal. Isaiah leaned closer, his breath creating a fog that mingled with the mist in the air, and whispered, low and steady, "It is all right. You are safe now." Atlas did not immediately respond, but his gaze followed Isaiah as he moved, legs and shoulders flexing with controlled strength, every movement deliberate and measured. A low groan escaped from the dog, soft but deliberate. Not a bark, not a growl, but a signal that he understood the voice, recognized the authority and the absence of threat. Isaiah's hand hovered just above Atlas's head, hesitating before making contact, allowing the dog to initiate the connection. A lightning flash illuminated the interior for a brief moment, reflecting off wet fur and pools of water, casting long shadows along the walls, and Isaiah saw the subtle tremor in Atlas's flank, the tiny lift of a paw as though testing whether the ground could be trusted. He exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in the air as if the storm itself waited for Atlas to move, and then, with a careful motion, he guided the dog's head to rest against his shoulder. Atlas leaned in lightly, not with surrender, but with recognition that this human would not abandon him. Isaiah shifted his weight, moving toward the kennel door, water sloshing around his boots, and Atlas stepped in sync, one paw at a time, muscles coiled but obedient to the rhythm established between them. Outside the kennel, the air carried the sharp scent of wet pine and mud, and faintly, the smoke from a nearby fireplace struggling to survive the storm. Every sound was amplified, from dripping water to the creak of the warped roof above. Isaiah could feel the presence of the storm in his chest, a steady thrum that matched Atlas's breathing. The dog's eyes tracked his every movement, the faint rise and fall of his sides showing effort, each step measured against the potential hazards of water, metal, and unseen debris. Isaiah opened the door further, water spilling outward, and gestured for Atlas to follow. The dog paused, lifting a paw, sniffing the threshold, assessing safety not with hesitation, but with calculation born from years of training and survival instinct. Isaiah extended his hand, palm open, and Atlas pressed his chest lightly against it, ready to step into the space beyond. A faint rumble of thunder reverberated through the kennel, a reminder of the storm still raging outside, but Atlas did not flinch. He trusted Isaiah in that moment as he had learned to trust no other. The metal latch groaned as Isaiah swung the door wider, creating a path through the shallow water. Atlas moved forward carefully, each paw leaving shallow impressions in the floor, eyes scanning the surroundings, sensing every subtle change in sound and scent. Isaiah followed, guiding the dog through the flooded interior, mindful of loose debris and the slippery concrete beneath. A broken bowl floated by, and Atlas's head followed it automatically, nose twitching at the mingled scent of rainwater, mud, and remnants of old feed. Isaiah adjusted his jacket against the rain seeping through the openings in the structure, feeling the weight of water on his shoulders, the cold pulling at his body, yet focused entirely on the dog at his side. As they reached the outer edge of the kennel, the floor began to slope gently toward the yard, and Isaiah could see the flash of his headlights reflected in the water outside. Atlas lifted his head briefly, ears forward, scanning the boundary between the safety of the interior and the uncertainty beyond. Isaiah knelt, speaking softly, "One step at a time, boy. We are getting out." The dog responded with a slight wag of his tail, a subtle motion almost imperceptible through the wet fur, yet significant enough to indicate agreement and the beginning of trust. Together, they moved through the open doorway, water lapping at their feet, Atlas stepping carefully, shoulders low, body alert but composed, as Isaiah mirrored every movement, matching the pace, the weight, the intent. Outside, rain fell in sheets, the storm still unrelenting, but the yard offered space, a pathway toward higher ground and eventual safety. The dog did not look back, only forward, matching the rhythm Isaiah set, guided by instinct, trust, and the quiet assurance of survival. Every breath from Atlas was measured, each step calculated, yet there was an undercurrent of relief in his movements, a subtle relaxation as he navigated the first open space since the rising flood had trapped him. Isaiah kept his voice low, a steady cadence. "Almost there. Almost safe." The dog responded with a soft, deliberate nudge, brushing against Isaiah's leg, the first physical acknowledgement of a connection forming, trust established through the simplest, quietest communication. The storm around them persisted, relentless and loud, but inside the shared space between man and dog, there was a calm determination, a mutual recognition of purpose and presence. Isaiah adjusted the flashlight, the beam cutting through the rain and revealing the contours of the flooded yard, the scattered debris, and the sheltering trees beyond. Atlas followed, careful, deliberate, chest still low, muscles coiled for any sudden need to react, but the tension easing with every step into the open. Isaiah exhaled, feeling the cold water seep through his gloves, the storm pressing against his body, and yet a sense of calm took hold. He had retrieved the dog from near certain danger, and Atlas had met him halfway, the first act of trust forming a bridge between survival and hope. Every movement, every breath, every soft sound of water and fur in contact marked the beginning of what would be a long journey towards safety, care, and understanding, the first steps of a bond that could withstand storms, floods, and the uncertainties that lay beyond the kennel walls. Isaiah led Atlas through the flooded yard toward the temporary shelter they had identified earlier, a small wooden building raised slightly above the ground to keep water out. The rain continued to pour in relentless sheets, the sound of droplets striking the tin roof forming a steady percussion that blended with the distant rumble of thunder and the soft rush of water along the ground. Atlas walked beside Isaiah, paws careful, shoulders low, eyes scanning every movement, every shadow, every subtle change in light, instinct guiding him while trust anchored him to the Marine at his side. Isaiah's flashlight cut a narrow path through the gray storm, revealing overturned planters, scattered branches, and debris carried in by the flood, yet Atlas navigated without hesitation, following the rhythm set by Isaiah's steps. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, muscles flexing with each careful placement of his paws, and Isaiah noted the way Atlas's ears twitched at the slightest sound, alert but not panicked. The path led them to a makeshift ramp of wooden planks laid across the puddled ground, slick and unsteady, and Isaiah paused to steady it before motioning Atlas forward. The dog stepped up onto the first plank with deliberate caution, each step measured, body low, eyes fixed on Isaiah, reading every movement, every pause, every breath, understanding that this human would not abandon him in the flood. The ramp shifted slightly under Atlas's weight, but the dog adjusted seamlessly, claws scraping gently against the wood, balance maintained by instinct honed through years of training. Isaiah followed closely, placing a hand on Atlas's back to guide him over the final span, feeling the warmth of the dog's soaked fur through the thin gloves covering his hands. Once across, they reached the door of the small shelter, water dripping from the eaves, pooling on the wooden threshold. Isaiah pushed the door open slowly, revealing the dim interior where hay and old blankets had been gathered to provide some insulation from the cold and wet outside. Atlas hesitated only for a heartbeat before stepping inside, body lowering into a cautious crouch, sniffing the unfamiliar space, ears flicking to every small sound. Isaiah followed, closing the door gently behind them, the sound of the latch echoing faintly in the small space. The air inside smelled of straw, damp wood, and the faint scent of animals that had passed through before, but it was dry, safe from the flood outside. Atlas moved to the center of the shelter, sniffing the bundles of straw before settling into a small, protective circle around a worn blanket. Isaiah knelt beside him, reaching out to run a hand along the dog's damp fur, feeling the tension gradually release as Atlas leaned slightly into the touch, head lowering in tentative trust. Lightning illuminated the shelter for a brief moment, casting long shadows across the walls and the water-streaked floor, and Isaiah noticed the subtle rise and fall of Atlas's flank, each breath steadying, eyes softening ever so slightly. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain hammering the roof and wind rattling the loose boards. Yet inside the shelter there was a sense of pause, a momentary calm, a fragile peace born from survival and the beginning of trust. Isaiah adjusted his jacket to dry the water running down his sleeves and focused on the dog, murmuring softly, "We will get through this, together." Atlas responded with a slight nudge against Isaiah's side, a gentle pressure that spoke of recognition, of understanding, of the first acknowledgement that they were not alone in the storm. Isaiah took a slow breath, listening to the rhythmic beat of rain outside and the measured, steady breaths of Atlas, feeling the bond begin to form, fragile but real. The dog lifted his head, eyes meeting Isaiah's in the faint flashlight glow, and in that gaze was a spark of something that had been buried beneath fear, water, and isolation. The first flicker of hope. Isaiah shifted to create a dry space on the floor, pulling aside the straw and blankets, and Atlas moved into it, settling down with careful movements, ears forward, alert but calm. The soft sound of water dripping through the roof was no longer overwhelming, but became part of the backdrop to this fragile sanctuary. Isaiah knelt beside the dog, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, feeling the warmth, the tremor, the life beneath the wet fur, and whispered in a voice steady and low, "You are safe now. Not a single step will be taken without you knowing it." Atlas exhaled, a soft sigh, eyes closing just slightly, the first signs of relaxation in hours, perhaps days. Outside, the floodwaters swirled and rumbled, the storm relentless, but inside the shelter, The Marine and the white K9 shared a moment of silent understanding, a fragile peace forged through trust, patience, and the quiet determination to survive together. The shelter held for only a few minutes before the storm found its way in. At first, it was only a thin leak tapping near the doorway, a quiet drip that landed beside Isaiah's boot. Then the wind shifted, hard and sudden, pushing against the back wall with enough force to make the boards flex and groan. Atlas lifted his head at once. His ears came forward. His body, tired as it was, changed shape in the dim light, from rescued animal to working K9, from fear to focus. Isaiah saw it before he heard it. The dog was no longer listening to the rain. He was listening through it. Somewhere behind the shelter, beneath the steady roar of floodwater, came a deeper sound, slow and heavy, like wood straining against something it could no longer hold. Isaiah turned his flashlight toward the rear wall. The beam trembled across stacked feed bins, old tarps, and a narrow service door half hidden behind a leaning shelf. Water seeped beneath that door in a thin brown line. Then the line widened. Atlas stood, unsteady but determined, and gave one sharp breath through his nose. Not a bark, a warning. Isaiah moved fast but calmly, pulling aside the shelf and checking the latch. The service door opened inward only a few inches before something outside blocked it. Debris, maybe a branch, maybe part of the broken fence. The water pressed harder. Isaiah looked back toward the front entrance, then toward the dog. "We are not staying here," he said. Atlas stepped toward him, but his legs shook. The cold had done more damage than the dog wanted to show. Pride kept him upright. Training kept him silent. Isaiah recognized both. He had seen Marines do the same thing after long nights, standing straight, because falling would make everyone else afraid. He wrapped one arm beneath Atlas's chest and the other behind his front legs, lifting carefully, making sure not to pull against the collar or the sore places hidden under the white fur. Atlas stiffened at first, a faint tremor running through his body, then settled against him with a trust so small it felt sacred. The dog was lighter than he should have been. Too light for a full-grown German Shepherd K9. Isaiah felt that truth in his arms, and something inside him hardened, not into anger that burned wild, but into the quiet kind that waits for the right moment and remembers every detail. He pushed the front door open with his shoulder. Rain struck his face like cold gravel. The yard had changed in minutes. Water now moved across it with purpose, carrying leaves, plastic crates, and pieces of fencing toward the ditch beyond the gravel drive. Isaiah's truck sat 30 yards away, headlights still burning through the rain, a pair of pale beams in a world gone gray. 30 yards was nothing on a clear day. In floodwater, carrying a weakened dog, it felt like crossing a river. Isaiah stepped down from the threshold. The water reached his shins, then his knees as he moved through the low part of the yard. Atlas pressed his wet muzzle against Isaiah's shoulder, breathing in short, controlled bursts. Halfway across, the dog suddenly raised his head and looked back toward the kennel building. Isaiah stopped. "No," he said softly. "Not that way." Atlas gave a low whine and strained his neck toward the dark structure. The old leather collar shifted, and beneath its soaked fold, Isaiah heard the faintest hard click, as if something hidden inside had tapped against metal. He looked down. Atlas was not looking at the kennel itself. He was looking past it, toward the row of service sheds behind the main building, where a strip of blue tarp snapped in the wind. Another secret, maybe. Another reason he had been left behind. Isaiah understood the look. He had seen it in working dogs when they caught a scent they could not ignore. Duty had survived in Atlas even when everything else had been taken from him. "I hear you," Isaiah whispered. "But first, you live." He kept moving. A floating branch bumped against his leg, and he braced himself, shifting Atlas higher against his chest. The dog did not struggle. He simply watched the blue tarp until the rain swallowed it from view. When they reached the truck, Isaiah opened the back door and laid Atlas across the folded emergency blanket he kept behind the seat. The dog tried to stand again, but his legs failed him gently, and he sank down with a quiet breath that fogged the window glass. Isaiah climbed in, started the engine, and turned the heat high. For a moment, he sat there with one hand on the steering wheel and one hand resting lightly on Atlas's shoulder. The dog's eyes stayed open, not afraid now, alert, waiting. Isaiah looked through the windshield at the flooded kennel, at the cheerful rescue sign twisting in the wind, at the dark service sheds beyond it. The county report had said the place was empty. The gate had said do not release. The dog had been left where the water would finish what? People had started. Isaiah reached for the radio. Static answered first, then a thin dispatch voice breaking in and out. He gave his location, requested veterinary support, and asked for Sheriff Dale Mercer by name. Then he looked back at Atlas. The white K9 lifted his head just enough to meet his eyes, rainwater dripping from his muzzle onto the blanket. Isaiah spoke quietly, not as a promise meant to comfort a scared animal, but as an oath spoken to a fellow survivor. You did your part, boy. Now I am going to do mine. Atlas blinked once, slow and heavy, and finally let his head rest against the seat as the truck turned toward the highway, carrying him away from the flood and toward the truth waiting beneath that old collar. The highway out of the flooded parish looked less like a road than a dark ribbon laid beneath moving water, but Isaiah kept the truck steady, both hands on the wheel, eyes shifting between the broken yellow lines ahead and the rearview mirror where Atlas lay across the emergency blanket. The heat had begun to fill the cab, fogging the windows at the edges, carrying the smell of wet fur, mud, vinyl, and the faint metallic scent of the old collar still tight around the dog's neck. Atlas did not sleep. His body had finally accepted the warmth, but his eyes stayed open, pale and watchful, following every flash of light that passed across the ceiling. Once, when thunder rolled too close, his ears flattened, yet he did not panic. He simply turned his head until he could see Isaiah's shoulder, as if confirming the Marine was still there. Isaiah noticed. Of course he noticed. Men who had lived through bad nights learned to hear quiet fear. I am still here, he said without looking back. The dog blinked once, slow, and his breathing eased. 20 minutes later, the small green sign for Carter Veterinary Clinic appeared through the rain at the edge of a two-lane road outside Abbeville, Louisiana. The clinic was one-story, brick, with a covered porch and a generator humming beside the wall, its yellow work light cutting a soft circle through the storm. Dr. Emily Carter was already waiting at the door in a navy raincoat over pale blue scrubs, her dark blonde hair tied back in a hurried knot, a stethoscope hanging loose around her neck. Isaiah had met her earlier that week while helping move supplies for the animal shelter. She was the kind of veterinarian who spoke gently to frightened creatures and sharply to careless people, and Isaiah had respected her before he knew why. She came down the steps as soon as he pulled in. Is he conscious? She called over the rain. Yes, Isaiah said, opening the rear door. Cold, weak, but aware. Emily looked inside, and her face changed. Not dramatically, not for show, just enough for Isaiah to see the professional part of her make room for the human part. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. Atlas watched her hand approach and gave a low warning sound from deep in his chest. Emily stopped at once. She did not pull back quickly. She did not crowd him. She let her hand rest in the air where he could smell her first. That is fair, she said softly. You do not know me yet. Isaiah leaned in beside her. Atlas, he murmured, using the name that had come to him on the drive, because a dog who held up under a whole storm deserved the name of something strong. She is here to help. The dog's eyes moved from Emily to Isaiah. The warning faded, not into trust, but into permission. Together they carried him inside on a clean canvas stretcher, past shelves of bandages, stainless steel bowls, and framed photographs of rescued dogs that had found homes long before this storm. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, coffee, warm towels, and rain on rubber mats. Emily guided them into the treatment room where bright overhead lights turned Atlas's wet coat almost silver. Under that light, the truth became harder to ignore. He was not just soaked. He was worn down. His white fur had been shaved in uneven patches along one shoulder. The skin beneath carried small, old marks arranged too neatly to be accidents. His front paws showed rough where from scraping against concrete. Around his neck, beneath the collar, the fur had thinned into a dark ring. Emily worked slowly, narrating everything before she did it, giving Atlas the dignity of knowing what came next. I am going to check your temperature now. I am going to listen to your heart. I am going to touch your leg. Each time, Atlas watched Isaiah first. Each time, Isaiah kept one hand near the dog's cheek and spoke in that low Marine cadence that made fear stand down for another few seconds. Emily's expression grew quieter as she examined him. She clipped away part of the collar only where it pressed too tight. careful not to disturb the hidden seam Isaiah had noticed. This was not caused by the flood, she said at last. Isaiah looked up. Rain tapped against the clinic windows like fingers trying to get in. What was not? Emily touched the edge of a shaved patch near Atlas's left shoulder. These marks. This pattern. Somebody was using equipment on him that no responsible trainer would use. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes did not. She moved to his ear and gently parted the damp fur. Beneath it, half hidden by a scrape of scar tissue and regrown hair, was a faded identification mark. Not a pet tattoo. Not a shelter code. A working number. Emily cleaned it with a cotton pad and angled the light. Isaiah leaned closer. The first characters were damaged, but the last three were clear. K9714. The room seemed to shrink around those digits. Atlas gave a soft breath, almost a sigh, and pressed his muzzle against Isaiah's wrist. Emily looked from the mark to the collar, then back to Isaiah. This dog did not come from a roadside rescue. Isaiah's jaw set. No, Emily lowered her voice. He was trained, registered somewhere. Maybe military, maybe law enforcement. But somebody tried to erase him. For a moment, there was only the generator outside, the rain on the glass, and Atlas breathing beneath the heat lamp. Isaiah felt the old anger return, quiet and exact. The kind that did not need shouting. The kind that remembered names, dates, roads, and lies. He looked down at the dog, at the tired eyes still refusing to close, at the collar that seemed to carry more than leather should. Then his radio, set on the counter beside a tray of instruments, cracked with static. A dispatcher's voice came through thin and broken. Sheriff Mercer is en route. He says Rhodes Animal Recovery Center was cleared before the flood. Atlas lifted his head. His ears went forward. At the sound of that place, at the rhythm of those words, his body tightened in recognition. Emily saw it. Isaiah saw it. The dog was exhausted, chilled, and hurting, but memory moved through him like a current. Emily slowly reached toward the collar again, stopping when Atlas looked at Isaiah. Isaiah nodded once, a silent request. Atlas held still. Beneath the ruined leather, something hard shifted with a tiny click. Emily froze. There is something inside this collar, she whispered. Isaiah did not answer. He kept his hand on Atlas, steady and warm, while outside the storm kept washing the parish clean, and inside that small clinic, the first real piece of the secret began to rise to the surface. The hard click beneath the collar seemed too small for the weight it placed in the room. Dr. Emily Carter did not move for several seconds. Her gloved fingers rested near the seam, careful, patient, waiting for Atlas to decide whether she was allowed to continue. The white K9 watched her through heavy eyes, his breath slow beneath the heat lamp, the rise and fall of his chest uneven but steady. Isaiah kept one hand against the dog's shoulder, thumb moving in a quiet rhythm through the damp fur. Outside, rain ran down the clinic windows in silver threads, blurring the parking lot, the generator light, and the dark outline of the highway beyond. The whole world seemed reduced to that treatment room, that collar, that tired animal who had carried a secret through floodwater and fear. Emily reached for a small pair of blunt surgical scissors. I can open the seam without cutting into whatever is inside, she said softly. Isaiah nodded, but his eyes stayed on Atlas. You hear that, boy? We are not taking anything from you. We are just looking. Atlas held still, not relaxed, not fully trusting, but still. That was enough. Emily trimmed the first layer of soaked leather, peeling it back a fraction of an inch. Mud and old adhesive clung to the inside. Beneath it, wrapped in clear waterproof film, sat a narrow metal capsule no longer than Isaiah's thumb. Emily stopped breathing for a moment. Isaiah saw it too. This was not an accident. This was not something a dog picked up in a storm. Someone had hidden it with care, then left the animal behind with equal care. Before Emily could open the capsule, tires hissed across wet pavement outside. Blue lights washed briefly over the blinds, soft and pulsing. Atlas lifted his head. His ears came forward. Isaiah felt the muscles beneath his hand tighten. A knock sounded at the front door, firm and official. Emily looked toward the hallway. That will be Sheriff Mercer. Isaiah straightened slowly. Keep the collar with you. Emily slipped the capsule and loosened collar into a sterile tray, then covered it with a folded towel. Atlas watched the tray disappear, his nose twitching, a low sound forming in his chest. Isaiah leaned close. I know. We will not lose it. The front door opened, bringing in the smell of rain, wet leather, and cold coffee. Sheriff Dale Mercer stepped into the clinic with his hat tucked under one arm, gray hair damp at the temples, tin uniform darkened by the storm. He was in his late 50s, broad in the middle, with a calm face that looked built for town meetings and Sunday traffic stops, not nights like this. His boots squeaked on the rubber mat as he followed Emily into the treatment room. He took one look at Atlas, then at Isaiah, and his mouth settled into a line. "Sergeant Brooks," he said. "Dr. Carter." Isaiah gave a short nod. Mercer's eyes moved to the dog. "This the animal from Rhodes?" Atlas's head rose higher at the name. The room tightened around that single word. Emily noticed. Isaiah did too. Mercer seemed not to. "He is a K9, Isaiah said. "Not just an animal." Mercer shifted his weight. "I understand that. But the facility owner says every kennel was cleared before the water came in. County records match that." Emily's voice stayed even. "County records are wrong." Mercer glanced at her, then back at Isaiah. "Or somebody found a loose dog near the property during the storm and it ended up inside. Floods make a mess of things." Isaiah did not answer right away. He looked at Atlas, at the faded working number near the dog's ear, at the wounds that had healed badly enough to tell a story even without words. "Floods move debris," he said. "They do not write do not release on a kennel door." Mercer's expression flickered, barely. "You saw that?" "I saw it." Emily stepped closer to the treatment table. "He also has a damaged identification mark. K9714. His microchip area was scarred, but I can scan again once he is more stable. There are signs of long confinement and improper handling." Mercer lifted a hand, not dismissive exactly, but careful in the way men get when they do not want a situation to become bigger than their authority can hold. "Doctor, I respect your concern. But Calvin Rhodes has worked with this parish for years. He has housed animals during hurricanes, donated equipment, helped with fundraisers. We need facts before we start making accusations that could ruin a man." At the name Calvin Rhodes, Atlas changed. Not violently, not loudly. His body rose off the blanket with sudden purpose, weak legs trembling, lips pulled back just enough to show alarm rather than aggression. A low growl filled the room, steady and certain, not wild, not confused, but aimed at the name as if the sound itself had a scent. Mercer froze. Emily did not step away. Isaiah placed both hands gently on Atlas's shoulders. "Easy." Atlas kept his eyes on the sheriff, but Isaiah knew the dog was not truly looking at Mercer. He was looking through the present into some darkroom memory had not let go of. Emily spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Dogs do not react to reputations, Sheriff. They react to what they remember." Mercer swallowed. For the first time, his confidence looked thinner. "That dog is exhausted. He could react to anything right now." "Then say the name again," Isaiah said. The room went still. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Mercer looked from Isaiah to Emily, then down at Atlas. He hesitated long enough to answer the question without speaking. Isaiah saw it. So did Emily. The sheriff knew more than he had brought into the room. Maybe not the whole truth. Maybe only fragments. But something. Emily turned toward the covered tray. "There is also something inside his collar." Mercer's face sharpened. "What something?" Isaiah stepped slightly between him and the tray, not aggressive, just present. "Evidence, maybe. We will know after it is documented properly." Mercer's jaw worked once. "Evidence belongs with my office. Once there is a chain of custody," Isaiah said, "and once federal K9 records are checked." The sheriff looked at him for a long second. The storm hummed in the walls. Atlas's growl faded into tired breathing, but he did not lie down until Isaiah touched his cheek. Then, finally, the dog sank back onto the blanket, spent but awake. Mercer rubbed a hand over his damp face. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its polish. "Calvin called dispatch 10 minutes before I got here. Said you broke onto private property and removed a dog that was under quarantine." Emily's eyes narrowed. He knew Atlas was alive. Isaiah turned his head slowly toward the sheriff. Mercer seemed to realize what he had revealed. The words hung there, heavier than thunder. If the place had been cleared, if the dog had only appeared by accident, if no one knew he was in that kennel, then Calvin Rhodes should not have known which dog had been taken. Atlas gave a soft, broken breath, as if the truth had finally entered the room and sat beside him. Isaiah looked down at the white K9, then back at Mercer. His voice stayed calm. "Sheriff, you need to decide whether you are here to protect a donor or help us save a witness." No one moved. Outside, the rain began to soften for the first time all night. Inside, under the clinic lights, the secret had not yet opened, but the cover around it had started to crack. The question stayed in the room long after Isaiah spoke it. Sheriff Dale Mercer looked toward the covered tray, then toward Atlas, then finally toward the rain-streaked window, as if the night outside might offer him a simpler answer. It did not. The storm had softened to a steady gray pour, but the clinic still felt like the center of something unfinished. Dr. Emily Carter stood beside the treatment table with her gloved hands folded at her waist, her face calm in the way doctors become calm when an animal is depending on everyone else not to fall apart. Atlas lay beneath the heat lamp, his white coat slowly losing the heavy shine of floodwater, but his eyes remained open. They followed the tray. They followed Mercer. They returned, always, to Isaiah. Mercer exhaled through his nose. "Open it here," he said at last. "I will witness it. Dr. Carter documents it. Sergeant Brooks, you stand where that dog can see you." Isaiah nodded once. It was not trust yet, but it was movement. Emily brought out a small evidence bag, clean gauze, and her phone to record the process. The capsule looked almost harmless when she lifted it from the ruined collar seam. A little metal tube wrapped tight in waterproof film, dull silver beneath mud and age. Atlas raised his head as soon as it left the tray. His ears came forward. A soft sound escaped him, not protest, not fear, but something painfully close to relief. Isaiah leaned close to him. "You carried it far enough," he whispered. "Let us carry it now." Emily opened the outer film with slow precision. Inside was a micro-storage card sealed in a second layer of plastic and a tiny strip of paper folded so tightly it had kept its shape. She did not unfold the paper first. She set the card into an adapter, connected it to the clinic laptop, and waited while the old machine recognized the file. The screen glowed pale blue against the dark window. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared with a date from 8 months earlier. Emily clicked the first file. There was no dramatic music, no confession, no villain stepping into perfect light. Just a fixed camera view of a training yard behind Rhodes Animal Recovery Center, the image grainy and tilted, rain spots dried on the lens. Several kennels stood in the background. Men moved through the frame carrying clipboards and transport crates. Dogs waited quietly behind chain-link doors. The audio was poor, but the voices were clear enough. One voice made Atlas rise before anyone named it. The dog pushed against the blanket, weak legs trembling, eyes locked on the laptop. Isaiah steadied him. "Easy, Atlas." On the screen, Calvin Rhodes appeared in a tan jacket and ball cap, smiling the kind of smile people use at fundraisers. He was speaking to someone. Off camera. The words came through broken but understandable. "The white one is not on the books anymore. Chip is out. Mark is handled. Buyer wants trained, quiet, and clean." Mercer's face lost color. Emily covered her mouth with the back of her hand, then lowered it quickly, forcing herself to stay composed. Isaiah said nothing. His silence felt heavier than anger. The video continued. A man off camera asked about county inspections. Calvin laughed softly. "I write the intake sheets. I write the transfer sheets. Everyone loves a rescue story." Atlas gave a low, exhausted whine. Isaiah placed his palm against the dog's chest, feeling the fast beat beneath the fur. "He is here," Isaiah said quietly, not to the room, but to the dog. "He is on a screen. Not in this room." Emily stopped the video. No one objected. The truth did not need to be watched all at once to become true. Mercer removed his hat and set it on the counter. Rain tapped gently behind him, almost polite now. "I knew Calvin was careless," he said, voice rough. "I knew he cut corners. I did not know this." Isaiah looked at him. "But you knew enough to look away." Mercer closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, shame had made him older. "Maybe I did." Emily picked up the folded paper with tweezers and laid it flat under the desk lamp. The ink had bled slightly, but remained readable. It was a list of numbers, dates, and initials. Beside one line was written K9714, White Shepherd, hold until transfer. Under that, in a different hand, were 3 words. Do not release. Isaiah felt Atlas shift beneath his hand. That phrase had not been a warning to protect people from the dog. It had been an order to keep the dog from reaching the world. Emily scrolled through the folder. More files appeared. Kennel photographs, intake sheets, transport records, dogs listed as adopted, relocated, or missing, all crossing through the same private facility, all tied to donors, buyers, and names that looked too clean on paper. Mercer stepped back from the laptop as if the screen had become a mirror he did not want. His radio crackled from his shoulder. A dispatcher asked if he needed assistance. Mercer lifted it slowly. He looked at Isaiah. Then he looked at Atlas, who had lowered his head again, exhausted by memory, but no longer alone with it. The sheriff pressed the button. This is Mercer. I need 2 units at Carter Veterinary Clinic and 2 more staged near Rhodes Animal Recovery Center. Quiet approach. No sirens unless necessary. The dispatcher answered, confused but obedient. Mercer added, and contact State Police Animal Crimes Division. Tell them we may have trafficking records tied to a registered canine. The word may carried caution. His eyes carried certainty. Isaiah's shoulders eased by a fraction. Emily saved copies of the files onto a clean drive, hands steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. Atlas watched her, then slowly reached one paw forward until it touched the ruined collar lying on the towel. Not clawing now, not guarding, just touching it, as if saying goodbye to the burden it had held. Isaiah saw the movement and felt something in his chest loosen. That is right, he whispered. You do not have to carry that anymore. For the first time since the kennel, Atlas closed his eyes fully. Not sleep yet. Not peace, not completely. But a beginning. Outside, the storm thinned into mist over the dark Louisiana road. Inside, beneath the clinic lights, the white K9 breathed easier while the secret he had protected began its journey out of darkness and into the hands of people finally willing to see it. The rain outside had finally lessened to a steady drizzle, the storm retreating into the distant bayous and leaving the air heavy with wet pine and mud. Isaiah Brooks adjusted the heat in the truck, watching Atlas settle against the folded blanket in the back seat, head low but eyes alert, ears flicking at every sound from the clinic and the highway beyond. Dr. Emily Carter had prepared the evidence drive, the micro-storage card now safely stored inside a secure case, its contents copied for law enforcement review. The weight of the discovery hung lightly in the room, no longer pressing on Atlas's shoulders, yet the tension of the night remained. Isaiah reached back and gently rubbed the dog's shoulders, careful of the sore spots beneath his wet fur, and Atlas lifted his muzzle to nuzzle the Marine's hand, a subtle acknowledgement that he understood the difference between danger past and safety present. Sheriff Dale Mercer stood near the front of the clinic, shifting from foot to foot, eyes scanning the storm-soaked highway outside. I need to coordinate with state police and the Animal Crimes Unit, he said, voice quiet, almost as if testing the words in the humid air. Isaiah nodded, still focused on Atlas. We can do that, but first, we make sure he is stable. Emily approached, gloves still on, examining Atlas's legs and paws with calm efficiency. He is strong enough to be transported to a temporary kennel until the full investigation can be completed. No further flooding risk there, heated and dry. Atlas lifted his head at the mention of transport, ears forward, chest rising in slow, deliberate breaths, eyes locking on Isaiah as if asking permission to move again. Isaiah met his gaze and whispered, yes. We move together. Outside, the wind stirred the trees along the clinic perimeter, carrying the smell of rain on asphalt, damp leaves, and distant wood smoke. The day was beginning to lighten slightly as the first pale sun struggled to break through thick clouds over the bayou. Isaiah guided Atlas carefully from the truck to the temporary transport unit, each step deliberate, measuring the dog's response, adjusting support as necessary. Atlas's legs were unsteady at first, but he moved in rhythm with Isaiah's guiding hand, head low, ears attentive, muscles coiled yet gradually releasing as trust continued to grow. Emily monitored from the side, checking vital signs, making notes, her calm presence reinforcing the safety of the moment. Sheriff Mercer observed silently, hands resting lightly on the brim of his hat, eyes fixed on Atlas, measuring the dog's reaction to every movement, every change in the environment. The transport unit was set up with bedding, heat pads, and a water dish, carefully arranged to prevent slipping on the wet surface. Atlas hesitated briefly at the threshold, scanning the area, nostrils flaring, ears forward, then stepped in with measured care, paws sinking slightly into the soft bedding. Isaiah crouched beside him, resting one hand on Atlas's back, whispering steady reassurances, maintaining eye contact, the shared connection between Marine and K9 reinforcing confidence. Emily closed the door carefully, checking locks and ventilation, then stepped back to allow Isaiah to remain with Atlas for a few moments before leaving. The dog lowered his head onto the padded floor, chest rising slowly and evenly, and lifted his eyes once more to Isaiah, communicating without words that he was ready to trust, ready to be safe, ready to face what came next. Isaiah stood, stretching slightly after hours of careful lifting and movement, glanced at the clinic, and then back at Atlas, knowing the long process of healing and truth discovery was only beginning. Outside, the drizzle continued, but the air felt cleaner, lighter, carrying the scent of wet earth and recovery. Atlas moved slightly, nudging Isaiah's hand, a soft sound of acknowledgement, not playful, not fearful, just present, existing in the quiet moment after survival, after danger, after discovery. Emily and Mercer coordinated quietly at the edge of the truck, ensuring records and evidence were logged, while Isaiah watched the dog settle, his own chest easing with the weight of responsibility shared, a trust established through hardship, through the storm, through every small act of care. Atlas closed his eyes briefly, a deep, calm exhale escaping, and the first true sense of peace since the flooded kennel began to take hold. Isaiah rested a hand on his shoulder, speaking softly. "This is the beginning, boy. We are just getting started." The white K9 moved slightly under the touch, head rising for a moment to nuzzle Isaiah's palm, then settling again, still aware, still present, finally free from the immediate threat, ready for the next steps towards safety, recovery, and the revelation of the full story hidden beneath the old leather collar. By sunrise, the parish looked washed and wounded, its roads slick with mud, its ditches full, its live oaks dripping beneath a pale gray sky that seemed too tired to hold more rain. Isaiah Brooks stood outside Carter Veterinary Clinic with his jacket zipped to his throat, watching Sheriff Dale Mercer speak quietly into his radio, while two state police vehicles rolled past without sirens. There was no rush of dramatic noise, no shouting across the parking lot, no clean and easy ending. Real truth usually arrived slower than that. It came in evidence bags, tired faces, copied files, and a white K9 sleeping for 10 minutes at a time because his body still did not believe the danger had passed. Atlas rested inside the clinic now, not in the transport unit, but on a thick padded mat beside the treatment table where Emily could watch his temperature and breathing. His fur was drying into soft, uneven waves, white in some places, cream-colored where mud still clung near his legs. The ruined collar lay sealed in evidence. The burden was gone from his neck, but the mark it had left remained, a dark ring beneath the fur, proof that freedom did not erase what had happened. Isaiah returned to the treatment room, carrying a paper cup of coffee he had not touched. Atlas opened his eyes before Isaiah crossed the doorway. Not startled, not afraid, just aware. Isaiah smiled faintly. "You keeping watch, Marine?" Atlas's tail moved once against the mat, weak but deliberate. Emily, standing at the counter with a clipboard, looked over and shook her head softly. "He reacts to you before he reacts to anyone else." Isaiah crouched beside the mat. "He knows I'm not going anywhere." Emily's expression gentled, but she did not soften the facts. "He will need time. Weeks at least before we know how much strength he can regain. Maybe longer for the fear. Dogs like him learn the world through patterns. We have to give him new ones." Isaiah placed his hand near Atlas's paw, not touching until the dog shifted closer on his own. "Then we start small." Outside, vehicles moved toward Rhodes Animal Recovery Center. Mercer had made the call before dawn. State police, animal crimes investigators, and parish deputies entered the property with warrants based on the footage, the records, and the identification mark Emily had documented. Calvin Rhodes was taken into custody without the spectacle he had probably imagined for other people's lives. No crowd watched. No one cheered. He stepped out beneath the gray morning light, while officers carried boxes of files from the office behind him, and the old rescue sign creaked over the gate like it had finally grown ashamed of itself. In the service sheds behind the kennel, Investigators found records that matched the files hidden in Atlas's collar. They also found dogs whose names had been changed, whose histories had been blurred, whose papers had been made to look like kindness. Some were scared. Some were silent. One old shepherd mix pressed his nose through the bars when Emily arrived later with a rescue team from Lafayette, and she had to turn her face away for a second before she could keep working. Mercy, when done right, was not sentimental. It was towels, leashes, warm water, careful hands, and people willing to stay after the cameras left. By noon, the rain had stopped completely. Sunlight broke through in thin gold lines over the clinic parking lot, touching the puddles until they shone like pieces of sky scattered across the asphalt. Isaiah sat on the floor beside Atlas while Emily removed the last of the damp bandaging from one foreleg and replaced it with a clean wrap. Atlas washed her hands, tense at first, then calmer when Isaiah spoke. Easy. She is good people. Emily smiled without looking up. High praise from a Marine. Earned praise, Isaiah said. Atlas gave a quiet huff, almost like agreement, and for the first time since the flood, the room did not feel like it was holding its breath. Mercer came in shortly after, hat in his hands, uniform stained from the soaked property, face older than it had been the night before. He stopped a few feet from the mat, giving Atlas space. We found enough, he said. State police are taking lead. Federal contacts are checking that K9 number. Isaiah looked up. And the others? Mercer swallowed. Alive. Most of them. The rescue team has them now. Silence followed. Not empty silence. The kind that honors what cannot be fixed in a single morning. Mercer turned his hat slowly in his hands. Sergeant, Doctor, I should have asked harder questions a long time ago. Emily did not absolve him. Isaiah did not either. Atlas simply watched, his head resting against Isaiah's boot. Finally, Isaiah said, Ask them now. Mercer nodded once. I will. That evening, when the sky cleared into a soft Louisiana blue, Emily carried out a small stainless steel tag she had made from a blank clinic tag, temporary until official records caught up with truth. On one side, she had engraved the name Isaiah had given him, Atlas. On the other, she had placed Isaiah's phone number and two simple words, safe now. Isaiah clipped it to a clean blue collar that sat loose and gentle around the dog's neck. Atlas stood for it, unsteady but proud, his white coat catching the last light from the window. He looked smaller without the old collar. Younger, somehow. Not weak. Just finally allowed to be more than what had been done to him. Isaiah knelt in front of him and held out his hand. Atlas stepped forward, slowly, placing his forehead against the Marine's palm. No bark. No command. No ceremony. Just trust, quiet as breath. Emily watched from the doorway, one hand pressed lightly over her heart. Outside, a church bell rang somewhere in town, soft and distant, carried over wet fields and open roads. Isaiah closed his eyes for 1 second, feeling the warmth of the dog beneath his hand, the weight of the day behind them, the long road ahead. Welcome home, Atlas, he whispered. The white K9 exhaled and leaned closer, and in that small clinic, after floodwater, fear, and buried secrets, grace arrived without thunder. It came on 4 paws, wearing a new collar, beside a man who had heard 3 taps in a storm and chosen not to keep driving.